Maya Rodriguez pushed her exhausted body to its limits as she sprinted across the rocky ground toward the landing zone. Her lungs burned from the thin mountain air, and her legs felt like lead weights. But she could hear the enemy aircraft getting closer, and she knew that the lives of the SEAL team depended on her reaching them in time. The extraction helicopter, a Black Hawk, was already beginning its approach to the landing zone. Maya could see the SEAL team positioned in a defensive perimeter around the designated pickup point. They had Abdul Nasir secured and were ready for immediate extraction. Everything was going according to plan, except for the enemy fighters that were racing toward them through the sky. Maya estimated that she had maybe 2 minutes before the enemy aircraft would be within striking range of the helicopter. The Black Hawk was vulnerable during landing and takeoff, and the enemy pilots would try to time their attack for maximum effect. As she ran, Maya pulled out her emergency flare gun. It was a long shot, but she fired a red flare into the air, hoping that the helicopter crew would understand it as a warning signal. The bright red light arced across the sky and exploded in a shower of sparks. The helicopter pilot, Chief Warrant Officer Sarah Chun, had been flying combat missions for 8 years. She immediately recognized the warning flare and began scanning the horizon for threats. Through her headset, she could hear the frantic radio chatter from the base as radar operators detected multiple incoming aircraft. "We have company coming," Chin announced to her crew. "Unknown aircraft approaching from the northeast. ETA approximately 90 seconds. The door gunners immediately began preparing their weapons while the crew chief started calculating how long it would take to load the SEAL team and get back into the air. It was going to be close. On the ground, Lieutenant Commander Matthews saw the warning flare and immediately understood its meaning. He had been in enough combat situations to know that Maya Rodriguez did not waste time on false alarms. If she was warning them about incoming threats, then those threats were real and immediate. "Hostile aircraft incoming," Matthews shouted to his team. "Prepare for contact during extraction." The SEAL team quickly adjusted their defensive positions to provide covering fire for the helicopter during its most vulnerable moments. Petty Officer Collins tried once again to establish radio contact with Maya, but the enemy jamming was still in effect. Maya was still 300 meters from the landing zone when she heard the first enemy aircraft pass overhead. It was an old Soviet-era Hind gunship, probably acquired from some arms dealer and modified for Taliban use. The helicopter was flying a reconnaissance pattern, trying to locate the extraction bird. Maya dropped to one knee and raised her rifle. The enemy gunship was flying low and fast, but it was still within range of her M4. She led the target carefully and squeezed off 3 quick shots. 2 of the bullets struck the aircraft's tail section, but they were not enough to bring it down. The enemy pilot immediately spotted Maya's muzzle flashes and began turning his aircraft toward her position. The Heinz door gunners opened fire with heavy machine guns, and bullets began tearing up the ground around Maya. Maya rolled behind a large boulder just as a stream of tracers passed through the space where she had been standing. She was pinned down, but she had accomplished her goal. The enemy aircraft was now focused on her instead of the extraction helicopter. The Black Hawk touched down in the landing zone, and the SEAL team began loading their prisoner. The crew chief was shouting for them to hurry as he watched the enemy gunship circling Maya's position. "We need to help her," Petty Officer Davis said as he looked toward Maya's position. "She is buying us time," Matthews replied grimly. "The best way to help her is to get out of here fast." But even as he spoke, Matthews was already planning a way to extract Maya. He was not about to leave behind the soldier who had single-handedly saved his entire team. Maya could hear the Black Hawk's engines spooling up for takeoff, and she knew she was running out of time. The enemy gunship was making another pass at her position, and this time the pilot was taking his time to line up a proper shot. Maya made a desperate decision. She broke cover and began running toward a cluster of rocks about 50 meters away. The enemy door gunners immediately opened fire, but Maya was moving in an unpredictable zigzag pattern that made her a difficult target. She almost made it to cover when a bullet caught her in the left shoulder, spinning her around and sending her tumbling to the ground. Pain shot through her body, but Maya forced herself to keep moving. She crawled behind the rocks, just as another burst of machine gun fire chewed up the ground where she had fallen. The wound in her shoulder was bleeding heavily, and Maya could feel her strength beginning to fade. She had lost a lot of blood during the long fight, and the new wound was making things worse. But she still had her rifle, and she still had ammunition. The enemy gunship was hovering now, trying to get a clear shot at Maya's position. The pilot was being cautious, knowing that the woman behind the rocks had already demonstrated her ability to hit aircraft with a rifle. Maya waited until the gunship was in a stable hover, then popped up from behind the rocks and emptied her entire magazine at the aircraft's cockpit. Several bullets struck the armored glass, spider-webbing it, and forcing the pilot to break off his attack. But Maya's rifle was now empty, and she had no more ammunition. She was wounded, trapped, and defenseless against an enemy gunship. It seemed like the end of the line for Maya Rodriguez. That was when the Black Hawk reappeared, flying fast and low across the valley floor. Chief Warrant Officer Chun had made a command decision to abort the extraction flight and return to help Maya. The door gunners were already engaging the enemy aircraft with their mounted machine guns. The air battle that followed was brief, but intense. The enemy hind was larger and more heavily armed, but the Black Hawk was faster and more maneuverable. Chun used her superior flying skills to position her aircraft for her gunners to get clean shots while staying out of the effective range of the enemy weapons. The end came suddenly. One of the Black Hawk's door gunners managed to hit the enemy aircraft's fuel tank, and the hind exploded in a spectacular fireball that lit up the entire valley. Maya watched the burning wreckage fall from the sky and allowed herself a small smile despite the pain in her shoulder. She had done her job, and everyone was going to make it home. The Black Hawk landed near Maya's position, and Petty Officer Davis jumped out to provide medical aid. Within minutes, Maya was aboard the helicopter and receiving treatment for her wounds. Abdul Nasir was secured in the back, and the SEAL team was preparing for the flight back to base. As the Black Hawk lifted off and began its journey home, Lieutenant Commander Matthews sat down next to Maya. She was conscious but pale from blood loss, and the medic was working to stabilize her condition. "Why did you do it?" Matthews asked quietly. "You could have been killed." Maya looked at him with tired eyes. "Because that is what soldiers do," she replied simply. "We protect each other." Matthews nodded, understanding completely. In a world full of advanced technology and sophisticated weapons, sometimes it still came down to individual courage and the willingness to sacrifice for others. The intelligence recovered from Abdul Nasir's laptop would prevent dozens of future attacks and save countless lives. The Taliban commander himself would provide valuable information about enemy operations in the region. The mission had been a complete success. But the real victory was simpler than that. Every member of the team was going home alive, thanks to one remarkable soldier who had refused to let her comrades walk into an ambush. Maya Rodriguez would receive the Distinguished Service Cross for her actions that day, making her one of the most decorated female soldiers in military history. But she would always say that the real reward was seeing her fellow warriors make it home safely to their families. Years later, when Maya had retired from active duty and was teaching military tactics at the War College, students would ask her about that day in the Afghan mountains. They wanted to know how she had found the courage to take on impossible odds. Maya would always give the same answer. She would tell them that courage was not about being fearless. Courage was about being afraid and doing what needed to be done anyway. It was about putting the mission and your fellow soldiers ahead of your own safety. And sometimes, Maya would add with a small smile, courage was about trusting your instincts and moving before anyone else even knew there was danger. Lieutenant Commander Jake Matthews could not believe what he was seeing. The SEAL team leader had been in combat for over 15 years, had participated in dozens of high-risk operations, but he had never witnessed anything like what Maya Rodriguez had just accomplished. 7 enemy snipers eliminated by one soldier with a standard infantry rifle. It was the kind of thing that happened in movies, not in real combat. But there was no time to process the magnitude of what had just occurred. The mission still had to be completed, and Matthews knew that the gunfire would have alerted every enemy fighter in the area. They needed to move fast. Maya stood up from the rock where she had been sitting and approached the SEAL team. Her uniform was dirty and torn from her desperate movement across the rocky terrain. There was a small cut on her cheek from flying stone fragments, and her hands were scraped from scrambling over the rough ground. But her eyes were calm and focused. "The compound is clean from this side," she reported in a steady voice. "But I counted at least 12 additional hostiles moving in from the east. They will be here in approximately 8 minutes. Matthews studied Maya's face. Most soldiers would be shaking with adrenaline after what she had just been through, but she seemed completely composed. There was something almost supernatural about her ability to remain calm under pressure. "How do you know there are 12? Asked Petty Officer Collins, the team's communications specialist. Maya pointed to a ridge on the eastern side of the valley. Dust clouds from their movement. The spacing indicates a full squad moving in tactical formation. They are trying to flank us." Matthews nodded. He had learned to trust the instincts of experienced soldiers, and Maya Rodriguez was clearly in a class by herself. "What do you recommend?" "We have 2 options," Maya replied, pulling out a hand-drawn map of the area. "We can abort the mission and withdraw through the southern pass, or we can complete the mission quickly and use the compound itself as a defensive position." The SEAL team had trained for months for this operation. Their target was Abdul Nasir, a Taliban commander who was responsible for coordinating attacks against coalition forces. Intelligence indicated that he was hiding in the compound below, possibly with important information about future operations. Walking away now would mean losing a valuable opportunity. But staying meant fighting a superior force while trapped in an enclosed space. It was a tactical nightmare. Maya seemed to read Matthew's thoughts. "There is a third option," she said quietly. "I can delay the approaching squad while you complete the mission." "Absolutely not," Matthews replied immediately. "We do not leave people behind." "You would not be leaving me behind," Maya explained patiently. "I would be providing covering fire and then withdrawing to a pre-planned extraction point. It is what I do." Before Matthews could object again, Maya had already begun moving toward the eastern ridge. She paused just long enough to give him specific coordinates for the extraction point and the timing for the withdrawal. Then, she disappeared into the rocky terrain as if she had never been there. Matthews cursed under his breath. He had worked with some independent operators before, but Maya Rodriguez was in a category all her own. She had just volunteered to take on 12 enemy fighters by herself, and she seemed to think it was a routine assignment. The SEAL team moved quickly toward the compound while Maya made her way to the eastern ridge. She had studied the terrain carefully during her long hours of observation, and she knew exactly where to position herself for maximum effectiveness. The approaching enemy squad was moving predictably. They were following a well-worn path that provided good concealment, but limited their options for maneuvering. Maya selected a position that would allow her to engage them from an elevated angle while still providing her with multiple escape routes. She did not have long to wait. The first enemy fighter appeared around a bend in the path exactly when Maya had predicted. He was followed by 11 others, all armed with automatic rifles and moving with the confidence of experienced fighters. Maya allowed the entire squad to enter the kill zone before she opened fire. Her first shot dropped the lead fighter, and her second took down the man bringing up the rear. The remaining 10 fighters were trapped in a narrow section of the path with limited cover. But these were not the confused snipers Maya had fought earlier. This was a trained infantry squad that knew how to react under fire. They immediately took cover and began returning fire while their squad leader shouted orders in Pashto. Maya found herself in a very different kind of fight. Instead of hunting individual targets, she was now engaged in a sustained firefight against multiple opponents who were working together as a team. Bullets whined off the rocks around her position as the enemy fighters tried to pin her down. Maya knew she could not win this fight through direct confrontation. She was outnumbered and outgunned. Her only advantage was mobility and her intimate knowledge of the terrain. She began a fighting withdrawal, moving from position to position while keeping the enemy fighters engaged. Every time the squad tried to advance, Maya would pop up from a new location and force them back into cover. She used every trick she had learned during her years of combat experience. She threw rocks to simulate movement in one direction while she moved in another. She used the echo of her gunshots off the canyon walls to confuse the enemy about her actual position. The fight stretched on for what seemed like hours, but was actually only 12 minutes. Maya gradually led the enemy squad away from the compound and deeper into the maze of ridges and ravines that made up the eastern side of the valley. Meanwhile, the SEAL team had reached the compound and breached the main building. They found Abdul Nasir hiding in a basement room along with 2 bodyguards and a laptop computer that contained valuable intelligence information. The extraction of the target took less than 5 minutes. As the SEALs prepared to withdraw with their prisoner, they could hear the ongoing gunfight in the distance. Matthews tried to raise Maya on the radio, but there was still interference from enemy jamming equipment. "We need to go help her," said Petty Officer Davis, the team's medic. "That is exactly what she told us not to do," Matthews replied, though every instinct told him the same thing. "She said she would meet us at the extraction point." The extraction point was a landing zone 2 kilometers south of the compound where a helicopter would pick them up. Getting there would require crossing open ground where they would be vulnerable to enemy fire. But Maya had specifically chosen that location for a reason. As the SEAL team began their movement toward the landing zone, Maya was finishing her own tactical withdrawal. She had led the enemy squad on a chase through increasingly difficult terrain, forcing them to spread out and lose their tactical cohesion. Now she was ready to disengage. Maya's final gambit was risky but effective. She triggered a small avalanche by shooting at some loose rocks on an unstable slope. The rockslide did not injure any of the enemy fighters, but it blocked their path and gave Maya the time she needed to disappear completely. The enemy squad found themselves alone in the wilderness, chasing a ghost who had vanished without a trace. Their radios crackled with urgent messages from their base, demanding to know why they had not prevented the raid on the compound. But they had no answers to give. Maya emerged from the rocky maze and began making her way toward the extraction point. She moved carefully, knowing that there might be other enemy forces in the area. Her ammunition was running low, and she was exhausted from the prolonged engagement. But she had accomplished her mission. The SEAL team had been able to complete their objective without casualties, and a valuable enemy commander was now in custody. Sometimes that was all that mattered. As Maya approached the landing zone, she could hear the distant sound of helicopter rotors. The extraction bird was incoming, right on schedule. She quickened her pace, eager to put this valley and its dangers behind her. But the mission was not over yet. Maya's trained ear detected something that made her heart sink. The helicopter was not alone. She could hear the distinctive whine of enemy aircraft somewhere in the distance. The Taliban had scrambled fighters to intercept the extraction. Maya broke into a run, knowing that she had to warn the SEAL team about the incoming threat. The landing zone was still 500 meters away, and she was not sure she could reach it in time. The race was on, and everything depended on Maya Rodriguez once again. The morning sun cast long shadows across the rocky terrain of the Afghan mountains. Staff Sergeant Maya Rodriguez crouched behind a cluster of boulders, her keen eyes scanning the valley below through high-powered binoculars. She had been in position since 0300 hours, watching, waiting, and gathering intelligence on enemy movements in the area. Maya was not your typical soldier. At 28 years old, she had already completed 3 tours in Afghanistan and 2 in Iraq. Her specialty was reconnaissance and surveillance, but what made her truly exceptional was her ability to read the landscape like a book. She could spot danger before it materialized, sense movement where others saw only stillness. The SEAL team she was supporting had no idea she was even there. They were positioned 2 clicks to the west, preparing for a dawn raid on a suspected Taliban stronghold. Maya's job was to provide overwatch and early warning of any threats that might approach their position. It was a routine mission, or so everyone thought. Through her binoculars, Maya studied the compound below. Intelligence reports indicated that a high-value target was hiding inside the mud brick buildings. The SEALs would move in fast and hard, extract the target, and be gone before the enemy knew what hit them. But something felt wrong to Maya. The compound was too quiet, too still. She had learned to trust her instincts during her years in combat. Those instincts had saved her life more times than she could count. They had also saved the lives of countless fellow soldiers who had come to rely on her sharp eyes and quick thinking. As she continued her surveillance, Maya noticed something that made her blood run cold. There was a small glint of light from a ridge approximately 800 meters to the north of the SEAL position. Then, another glint from a different location. And another. Her heart began to race as she realized what she was seeing. Sniper scopes. 7 of them. The enemy had set up a perfect ambush. They knew the SEALs were coming, and they had positioned marksmen at strategic points around the valley. The special operations team would be walking into a death trap, and they had no idea what was waiting for them. Maya quickly grabbed her radio to warn the SEAL team, but static filled her earpiece. The enemy was jamming communications. She tried different frequencies, but all were blocked. The SEALs were completely cut off from outside support, and they were about to walk into the crosshairs of 7 trained killers. Time was running out. Maya could see the SEAL team beginning their approach in the distance. They moved with the precision and confidence of elite warriors, but they were blind to the danger that surrounded them. In less than 10 minutes, they would be in the kill zone. Maya had 2 choices. She could abandon her position and try to reach the SEALs on foot, but that would take too long. By the time she covered the distance between her position and theirs, the ambush would already be sprung. Or she could do something that went against every rule in the military handbook. She could break cover and engage 7 enemy snipers by herself. Maya was an excellent shot, but she was not a sniper. Her weapon was a standard M4 carbine, not the precision rifle that her enemies possessed. They had the advantage of position, firepower, and numbers. Any reasonable person would say it was suicide. But Maya Rodriguez was not reasonable when the lives of her fellow soldiers were at stake. She quickly studied the positions of the 7 snipers through her binoculars, memorizing their locations and the terrain features around each one. The first sniper was positioned on a rocky outcrop 300 meters to her left. The second was hidden among some scrub brush on a ridge 400 meters away. The third and fourth were dug in behind a stone wall that ran along the valley floor. The 5th sniper had taken position in the ruins of an old watchtower. The 6th was concealed in a grove of trees near a dried riverbed. The 7th, and probably the most dangerous, was positioned on the highest ridge with a commanding view of the entire valley. Maya knew that once she fired her first shot, all 7 snipers would know her position. She would have maybe 30 seconds before they could adjust their aim and return fire. In that 30 seconds, she would have to move, relocate, and continue engaging targets while somehow staying alive. It was an impossible task, but impossible had never stopped Maya Rodriguez before. She took a deep breath and began to move. Unlike the enemy snipers who were locked into their positions, Maya understood that mobility was her greatest asset. She had studied the terrain for hours and knew every rock, every depression, every bit of cover that could hide her movement. Maya's first shot rang out across the valley like thunder. The bullet found its target, and the sniper on the rocky outcrop fell silent forever. But Maya was already moving before the echo of her shot had faded. She rolled left, scrambled down a small ravine, and popped up 50 meters from her original position. The enemy snipers were confused. They had heard the shot, but they could not locate the shooter. Maya used their confusion to her advantage. Her second shot took down the sniper hidden in the scrub brush. Again, she was moving before the enemy could react. The remaining 5 snipers began to panic. They started firing at shadows, at rocks, at anything that might be hiding their unseen attacker. But Maya was like a ghost, appearing just long enough to take a shot, and then vanishing into the landscape. Her third shot was the most difficult. The 2 snipers behind the stone wall had good cover and were communicating with each other. Maya had to use an old hunting trick her father had taught her years ago. She threw a rock to create a distraction, then circled around to attack from an unexpected angle. Her shot took down one of the snipers, but the other one spotted her muzzle flash and returned fire. The bullet passed so close to Maya's head that she felt the heat from its passage. She dove for cover behind a boulder just as another round shattered the rock inches from her face. She was pinned down, and the remaining 4 snipers were beginning to zero in on her position. That was when Maya Rodriguez did something that would be talked about in military circles for years to come. Instead of staying hidden and playing defense, she stood up and charged directly at the enemy position while firing her rifle from the hip. It was the last thing the enemy expected. Snipers were trained to engage targets at long range, not to deal with a wild woman running straight at them while screaming at the top of her lungs. Maya's charge broke their concentration and their nerve. Her fourth kill came as she sprinted across open ground, firing as she ran. The sniper in the watchtower tried to track her movement, but could not lead his target properly. Maya's bullet found him before he could adjust his aim. The three remaining snipers were now in full panic. They abandoned their carefully prepared positions and began moving, which was exactly what Maya had hoped for. Once they started moving, they became just as vulnerable as she was. The battle that followed was unlike anything in the training manuals. It was a deadly game of cat and mouse played out across the rocky terrain of the Afghan mountains. Maya used every bit of cover, every fold in the ground, every shadow to stay hidden while she hunted her hunters. By the time the SEAL team reached the valley floor, the shooting had stopped. They found Maya Rodriguez sitting on a rock, calmly reloading her rifle. Around her, scattered across the valley, lay the bodies of 7 enemy snipers. The SEALs stared at her in amazement. They had heard the gunfire but had not understood what was happening. All they knew was that someone had cleared the way for them, and their mission could proceed without opposition. Maya simply nodded at the SEAL team leader and pointed toward the compound. The mission was not over yet.